The laid-back god of war. I checked out after becoming a general ### Chapter 1, Death and Rebirth. If anyone asks how I died, tell them I went out in a blaze of glory. Don't mention the charred power strip, don't mention the spilled instant noodle soup all over the floor, and definitely don't mention that pathetic "oh my god" I gasped before I breathed my last. I'm Chunyu, former pro esports player, a legend on the battlefield of pixelated warriors thanks to lightning-fast reflexes and a top-tier IQ. Never in a million years did I think I'd kick the bucket, not mid-competition, but like a waterlogged dumpling, electrocuted to death in my crummy rental apartment. 1 second I was glued to my gaming chair, fingers flying as I commanded my digital army to storm the enemy turret. The next, a deafening bang erupted, and darkness wrapped around me like a shroud of death. When I opened my eyes again, everything had changed. A rock-hard plank bed dug into my lower back. Definitely not an IKEA special. The air reeked of blood, iron, and unwashed sweat. Above my head hung a canvas tent, and the flickering glow of a dim lantern made my eyes ache. Rows of armored soldiers knelt rigidly on the ground, the clinking of their armor ringing out in unison. "General Chunyu, we've won! The enemy's in retreat!" Someone roared, scrambling toward me, their voice trembling like a kicked puppy, their eyes wide with lingering terror. I blinked, processing the keywords: General, Chunyu, victory, enemy. I propped myself up, fully expecting a game loading screen to pop up. But nothing appeared. This body was tall and muscular, a far cry from my old sedentary noodle arms physique. I held up my hand. A long, jagged scar ran across the back of it, wild, powerful, exactly the kind of badass detail I'd always add when customizing a character in RPGs. The next instant, a flood of memories crashed into my mind: bloody battlefields, hoarse battle cries, the image of a general colder than ice, one who never questioned an order, who groveled at the feet of Crown Prince Xiao Rui like a loyal dog. My head throbbed so badly I thought it would split open. And then it hit me: holy crap, I've transmigrated. No weak scholar, no doomed farmer, not even a cannon fodder villain. I jumped straight into the body of Chunyu, the great protector general of the Diyu dynasty, the sharpest sword in the emperor's arsenal, a name that struck fear into enemy hearts, a leader his soldiers would follow to the ends of the earth. And me? A lazy slob who'd skipped tournaments to sleep in and lived on a diet of junk food. Best death ever, I muttered, flexing my newly powerful arms and grinning like an idiot. The soldiers' eyes nearly popped out of their sockets, their faces draining of color as if they'd seen a ghost. It hit me a beat later: a stone-cold war hero grinning like a fool was way scarier than any invading army. "What are you staring at?" I snapped, instinctively patting my waist. My fingers closed around a heavy wine gourd. Jackpot. Bonus loot. I pulled the stopper and took a huge swig. The fiery liquor burned down my throat, making me shiver with pleasure. "We just won a battle and you're all moping around, waiting for mold to grow on us?" The soldiers exchanged confused glances. Clearly, the original owner of this body had never touched a drop of alcohol in front of his subordinates, let alone grinned like he just hit the lottery. "Gee, General, are you all right?" A young soldier piped up, his voice quivering with nerves. "Never better," I replied, stretching lazily and savoring the feel of tight, toned muscles. No more back pain. No more noodle arms. This body was perfect. "All of you, get up. The ground's cold. You want to ruin your knees, and who's gonna fight my wars for me?" The soldier's jaw dropped. Their general, their general, was actually worrying about their knees? Next thing you know, he'll be telling them to eat their vegetables. I stood up, my towering frame making the tent feel cramped and small. Cheers erupted outside, but inside, I twirled the wine gourd in my hand, deep in thought. So this is what rebirth feels like? Not bad. But I wasn't stupid. Buried in the original owner's memories was a rotten script. He was fated to be Xiao Rui's most loyal lapdog, chained to the scheming crown prince for life, destined to meet a gruesome end. I nearly spat out my wine. Sorry, but I'm not acting in this garbage screenplay. In my last life, I spent half my time dodging my boss, my homework, and any sense of responsibility. Now you want me to play the loyal dog? Dream on. From this day forward, I'm the laid-back general. Drink wine, sleep in, snack all day, and use my brain only when absolutely necessary. No one's allowed to bother me. As the thought crossed my mind, the face of my deputy, Han Bo, popped into my head. From the memories, he was an honest, hardworking man who handled all the army's logistics and grunt work while the original Chunyu got to play the invincible war god, a poor, overworked toolman. No sooner had the thought registered than Han Bo burst into the tent, his brow furrowed with worry. "General, you need to rest. The Emperor is waiting for the victory report. We have to draft the official dispatch at once." "Dispatch?" I yawned, waving a hand dismissively. "You write it. Your handwriting's better than mine." Han Bo's eyebrows shot up, his face twisting in disapproval. "General, that's against protocol." I pointed at the dice cup on the table, a memory clicking into place. "Easy, we'll roll dice for it. You win, I write the dispatch. I win, you do it. Fair's fair, right?" Silence descended over the tent. Han Bo stared at me like I'd grown a second head and declared myself the god of gambling. "Gee, General Chunyu, you want to roll dice for this?" I leaned back in my chair, taking another leisurely sip of wine. "What? Scared you'll lose?" The words left him speechless. And so my new life began, not with a heroic vow to defend the realm, not with a pledge of loyalty to the throne, but with a wine gourd in one hand, a dice cup in the other, and a deputy staring at me like I'd lost my mind. Honestly, it was awesome. ## Chapter 2, Embracing the New Persona. If every time you transmigrated you had to play the loyal lapdog, I could have bought a lifetime supply of potato chips with my prize money from my last life. Speaking of which, I still craved the taste of tomato-flavored chips. But back to business. After waking up in Chunyu's body, the first fun thing on my to-do list was figuring out just how deep of a hole I'd fallen into. The original owner's memories were a total disaster zone. Not only was he Xiao Rui's loyal dog, he was also the Crown Prince's bed partner in private. That's right. The fearsome general who charged into battle wielding a sword was actually a spineless pushover in the bedroom, bending over backward to please that scheming snake of a prince. I grabbed the wine gourd, ready to hurl it across the tent, and nearly clocked Han Bo right between the eyes. "General!" he yelped, ducking out of the way in a panic. "Relax, it's not you," I said, waving him off and swirling the wine in the gourd. "Just remembering something gross that's making my skin crawl." Han Bo looked at me like I'd either gone mad or contracted some strange parasite. Could I blame him? Anyone who saw their cold, unfeeling general suddenly acting like a lunatic would be worried. But I was over the moon. Just because the script said I had to obey that two-faced crown prince like a good little dog didn't mean I was going to follow it. Sorry, but my dictionary doesn't have the words resign oneself to fate. I'd spent years playing strategy games. I wasn't dumb enough to bet my life on a toxic alliance. "No way," I declared, sprawling out in my chair, propping my bare feet up on the table, and clutching the wine gourd tightly. "I'm here to eat good food, drink good wine, and sleep till noon. Let someone else deal with that political garbage. As for Xiao Rui, he can go play his little power games alone." Han Bo's eyebrow twitched. He looked like he wanted to argue but thought better of it. Smart man, knew when to pick his battles. I ignored the boring battle reports piling up on the table and spent the entire day hanging out with the soldiers. Don't get me wrong, I was totally boosting morale. Yep, that's it. Super official stuff. The dice cup clattered loudly on the wooden table. I leaned back in my chair, one hand holding the wine gourd, a mischievous grin playing on my lips. "Double sixes again. Admit it. You guys are jealous." One soldier groaned dramatically. "General, you must be cheating." "Cheating?" I scoffed, tossing the dice cup back to him. "This is called talent. You normies wouldn't understand." Another soldier leaned in, his voice hesitant. "General, shouldn't you be writing the official report for the court?" "The court?" I sighed dramatically, as if the mere words were draining the life out of me. "You mean that bunch of old farts who care more about their fancy robes and long beards than actual work? Boring. Why would I waste my time there when I could be winning your money?" The soldiers laughed nervously, none of them daring to say a word. They really didn't know if they should join their general's sudden madness or report him to the emperor. But I wasn't just fooling around. When the messengers arrived with news, border troop movements, grain shortages, small-scale enemy raids, I'd glance at the reports and come up with a solution in 2 seconds flat. Shift the supply route 10 miles west. The canyon provides cover, Bandits won't dare attack there. Split the cavalry into 2 teams, one to make noise and draw attention, the other to sneak around. The bandits will chase the loud one right into our ambush. Suppressed laughter echoed through the hall. Minister Fong was humiliated beyond repair. Xiao Rui sat beside the emperor, silent the entire time, his eyes fixed on me like a hunter watching his prey, like a collector who'd realized his prized chess piece had broken free of the board and started moving on its own. I ignored him completely, pouring myself another cup of wine. If everyone's done here, let's adjourn the meeting. I don't want my wine to get warm before I finish it. The emperor roared with laughter. Well said. Truly, you are my sharpest sword. The ministers hung their heads in defeat, Minister Fong glaring at me with hatred. I leaned back in my chair, legs crossed, grinning contentedly. Lazy? Absolutely. Carefree? Without a doubt. But right now, I was the most invincible person in the room. Let the rumors fly. Facts speak louder than words. I could solve their problems even half drunk. They'd better show me some respect. I raised my cup in a silent toast to myself, to rumors, to complaints, and to my effortless victory. ## Chapter 5. Xiao Rui's trap. When people think they're being clever, they all make the same face, eyes narrowed slightly, a smirk playing on their lips, like a cat staring at a mouse. I'd seen that face a million times in my gaming days, and every time, I'd beaten them into a pulp. The next day at court, Xiao Rui had that exact face. General Chunyu, today there is a matter of great importance concerning the loyalty between ruler and subject that I entrust to you, he said. His voice as smooth as silk, but laced with hypocrisy. Oh, I thought to myself, here it comes, the loyalty test. I raised the wine gourd in a mock toast. Sounds serious. Make it quick. I've got a nap scheduled. He ignored my sarcasm, waving a hand at the court scribe. Minister of Revenue has accused Minister Xiao of embezzling border defense funds. General Chunyu, you are the person I trust most in this world. I hope you will conduct a secret investigation. Translation: pick a side with Minister Fong. Take down Minister Xiao, a trap wrapped in political bullshit. The court buzzed with gossip. Minister Fong shot me a triumphant smile. Xiao Rui looked confident, like he already had me wrapped around his finger. I just took another sip of wine. Oh, you want me to go through boring account books? I have full confidence that the general will spare no effort to fulfill this mission, he replied, his smile never wavering. I tapped the rim of my wine cup with my finger. Nope. 2 simple words, spoken clearly and firmly. The entire court gasped in unison, nearly collapsing in shock. Even the emperor raised an eyebrow in surprise. General Chunyu, how dare you defy my order? Xiao Rui demanded, his voice dropping to a dangerous growl. I shrugged my shoulders. I'm a soldier. My job is to kill enemies and win battles, not to be a bookkeeper. Minister Fong jumped up immediately, his voice loud and indignant. Your Majesty, this is outrageous. General Chunyu dares to. Cut it out, Minister Fong, I interrupted him, rolling my eyes. Everyone can see your little scheme. Spare us the drama. Another wave of gasps swept through the hall. Minister Fong's face turned as red as a boiled crab. I turned to Xiao Rui, whose lips were already twitching with anger. But if you really want to solve this problem, I can give you the answer right now. I pointed the wine gourd at Minister Xiao. Did you embezzle the military funds? Minister Xiao froze, stammering nervously. I would never do such a thing. Too slow, I said, shaking my head. Guilty people hesitate when they answer. Next. I looked at Minister Fong, who was grinning even more broadly. It was obviously him. The evidence is overwhelming. Too fast, I said, taking another sip of wine. Liars are in a hurry to distance themselves from the crime. Interesting. Everyone in the Golden Hall stared at me like I was a monster. Xiao Rui leaned forward slightly, his voice soft but sharp. What brilliant insight do you have, General? Simple, I said casually. Make them publicize their account books and check them against each other. If Minister Fong is lying, the numbers won't add up. If Minister Xiao is lying, same thing. Case closed in half an hour, and I can go back to my nap. Silence fell over the hall. The emperor stroked his beard, looking amused. An excellent plan, quick and efficient. Minister Fong panicked, trying to defend himself, but the emperor waved him off with a sharp gesture. Issue the order. Fetch the account books at once for verification. The scribe scrambled to retrieve the account books, the atmosphere in the hall tense enough to cut with a knife. I leaned back in my chair, pulling a handful of preserved plums from my sleeve and munching on them leisurely. Xiao Rui's little trap was just like those stupid tricks in games that tried to make me do something stupid, only to end up backfiring spectacularly. Unsurprisingly, as soon as the account books were compared, the truth came out. The records were a mess. The military funds had disappeared without a trace. Signatures were forged. It was obvious that something fishy was going on. Minister Qiao wasn't exactly an honest man, but the evidence against Minister Fong and his faction was ironclad. The emperor slammed his fist on the armrest of his throne, his face livid with anger. Unacceptable! Arrest them at once! The guards rushed forward, and the ministers scattered in panic. I sat quietly sipping my wine, thinking to myself, piece of cake. Xiao Rui locked eyes with me across the hall, the confident mask slipping slightly. He was thinking, is this guy making a fool of me? I grinned lazily, raising the wine gourd in a silent toast to him. The answer, duh. Otherwise, why did I transmigrate here? After the court adjourned, the ministers grumbled about how crazy I was, but couldn't help but admire me. I swaggered out of the palace, Hanbo chasing after me, his face covered in sweat. General, that was way too risky. What if the crown prince, he set a trap? I got bored and kicked it over, I said, stretching lazily. Maybe he'll be so angry he won't have the energy to scheme tonight and can get a good night's sleep. The truth is simple. When you refuse to play by someone else's rules, they either have to adapt or fall apart. Watching Xiao Rui scramble to adjust his plans would be the most entertaining part of my new life. ## Chapter 6. The laid-back god of war wine tastes best when the world is quiet. The night sky over the military camp was dotted with stars, a cool breeze blowing gently, perfect for a little evening drink. Unfortunately, the border alarm chose that exact moment to ring out. General, it's an emergency. Urgent report from the beacon tower on the northern border. Enemy raiders are attacking. Han Bo's voice sounded like it was being strangled. He was only half dressed in his armor, his eyes wide as saucers as he burst into the tent. I glanced at him, holding my wine jug, completely uninterested. Oh, enemy raiders. Wake me up when they've got at least 400 men. General, Han Bo nearly cried, his voice cracking with desperation. They've already attacked the outpost. At least 300 cavalrymen. Outside the tent, chaos erupted, the shouts of soldiers, the clinking of armor, the clashing of weapons. The tent flap was thrown open violently, and a young captain rushed in, his face pale with fear. General, please issue your orders. My order is this. Let me finish my nap, I replied, yawning and scratching my head. The captain's face turned even paler, looking like he was about to faint on the spot. Han Bo grabbed him by the sleeve, his voice urgent. Ignore him. Assemble the troops. Prepare the cavalry. Sound the horn. Wait a minute, I interrupted him, my eyes half open. Which direction are the enemy raiders coming from? The northern pass, the captain stammered. They set fire to the mountain ridge and charged down. Wind direction tonight? I asked, rolling onto my side. West. Southwest wind. A grin tugged at the corner of my lips. Simple. Too simple. Perfect. Han Bo, move all the archers to the western ridge, I ordered lazily. Prepare plenty of fire oil and aim for the dry grass. Han Bo's eyes widened in shock. Why you want to set the mountain on fire? Yep, I replied with a hum. The southwest wind will blow the fire straight into the enemy's path. Horses are afraid of fire. They'll panic and scatter. Victory without a fight. Done. I mumbled something about going back to sleep and closed my eyes. Silence fell over the tent. The captain stared at me, his face as white as a sheet, while Han Bo stood there with his mouth open, unable to speak. This is brilliant, Han Bo shouted suddenly, grabbing the captain's arm and rushing out of the tent. Shouts of orders echoed outside. I closed my eyes, taking another sip of wine, let the chaos unfold outside. As long as the fire blew in the right direction, it was none of my business. The next morning, when I stepped out of the tent, the military camp was celebrating like it was a festival. The soldiers cheered and laughed. slapping each other on the back and singing songs. Smoke rose from the fields on the northern border, but the enemy raiders were nowhere to be seen, only piles of grain and weapons were left behind. General Chunyu, your plan was amazing. You saved all of us. The soldiers crowded around me, their faces filled with excitement. May the heavens bless our army. I've never seen such a brilliant victory. Not a single soldier was harmed. One soldier even knelt down and kowtowed. General, you must be blessed by the gods. You're no ordinary man. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Oh, I'm a god now? Yes. Another soldier chimed in, his eyes filled with admiration. You're a carefree immortal, drinking wine, half asleep, and winning a battle with just one order. I nearly choked on my wine. Carefree immortal? Way better than lazy drunkard. Hanbo stomped over to me, his hair messy, his eyes bloodshot from staying up all night. General, do you realize how dangerous that was last night? What if the wind had changed direction? What if the fire had gotten out of control? But it didn't change direction, and it didn't get out of control, I replied with a cheeky grin, pointing outside at the celebration. Hanbo groaned in frustration, rubbing his temples. Heaven will punish you for your arrogance. I held up the wine jug and laughed. Maybe, but until then, I've got a lot of wine to drink. The soldiers' cheers grew louder, the shouts of carefree immortal echoing throughout the camp. I sipped my wine, amused and satisfied. They thought I was a god descended from heaven, but little did they know, I just read a few more maps and summed up some basic patterns. Years of playing video games had taught me one thing: it's all about mastering the game's mechanics and seeing through the chaos. If this reputation meant I could drink wine, sleep in, and avoid doing all the hard work, why ruin the perfect misunderstanding? I collapsed back into my chair, watching the morning sun filter through the smoke and shine down on the earth. I thought to myself, overnight, without breaking a sweat, I've got everything under control. Not bad at all. Now, time for breakfast. Hashtag chapter 7, the Crown Prince's jealousy. The best smell in the world is the scent of wine. Now, wherever I go, people bow down to me, not the stiff, formal bows reserved for royalty, but bows filled with awe and admiration, accompanied by whispered comments. Look, that's the immortal general. He drove off the enemy raiders with just one fire. This feeling was way more tiring than fighting a battle. Fame was overrated. Hanbo, on the other hand, was over the moon. General, do you realize what this means? The soldiers are loyal to you. They'd follow you through fire and water. Fire and water can wait, I said, taking another sip of wine, my face twisting in disgust. Hell is way too hot. I hate sweating. Can you please take this seriously? Hanbo paced back and forth, wringing his hands in frustration. This loyalty could shake the very foundation of the court. That's exactly why I'm not taking it seriously, I replied, shrugging my shoulders. If I acted like I cared, all that political garbage, reports, alliances, bribes, would come flooding in. No thanks. Hanbo looked at me like he wanted to strangle me. Honestly, I was impressed he hadn't tried yet. News traveled fast in the military camp, faster than a cat smelling fish. Unsurprisingly, Xiao Rui summoned me to the palace again. The palace was the same as always, gaudy, over the top, the scent of incense so thick it made me want to gag. The ministers lined up to bow to me as I walked in, the wine jug in my hand, their gasps of shock echoing in the hall. Drinking in the palace. He's gone mad. He's suicidal. I winked at them. Relax. Wine makes everything look better. Just then, Xiao Rui entered the hall, dressed in luxurious silk robes, radiating arrogance and pride. He waved a hand to dismiss the ministers, leaving only the two of us alone in the room. His eyes were cold, his jaw clenched tightly. General Chunyu, you've become quite popular lately. His voice was calm, but I could smell the jealousy, thick, unadulterated envy. I plopped down onto a chair, stretching lazily and pouring myself a cup of wine. Popular? Can't help it. The people have good taste. Maybe they just like seeing me smile. A sharp glint flashed in Xiao Rui's eyes. Don't be insolent. The soldiers sing your praises. The common people pray for you on the streets, even calling you their guardian deity. I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. Oh, that's great. Way better than being called the tax collector. Chunyu. Xiao Rui's voice suddenly turned sharp, like a whip cracking through the air. Are you planning to betray me? Betray? I tilted my head, pretending to think about it carefully. Sounds like a lot of trouble. Xiao Rui's eyes widened in shock, his anger replaced by confusion. Trouble? Yep, I replied, leaning back in my chair and grinning. Why would I want to steal your throne? It sounds like a lot of work. You haven't seen my desk. Piles of reports as high as a mountain, scarier than any battlefield. Just stamping and signing documents would kill me. I'd rather wrestle a tiger. Xiao Rui stared at me for a long time, his expression complex. His lips twitched, like he wanted to argue but didn't know where to start. After a moment, a flicker of relief crossed his face, quickly replaced by a scoff. You expect me to believe you have no ambition? I shook the wine jug in my hand. Believe what you want. I'm living the dream right now, drinking wine, sleeping in, and teasing you. Life's good. Teasing me? Yep, I said, giving him a lazy smile. You look so funny when you're angry, like a cat with its fur standing on end. Xiao Rui's nostrils flared. The next second, he'd either kill me or pounce on me. I couldn't decide which would be more entertaining. In the end, he spun around sharply, his robe swirling around him like a storm cloud of anger. You're hopeless. Thank you, I called after his retreating back, taking another sip of wine. As I walked out of the palace, the ministers glared at me with hatred, their whispered insults dripping with venom. I didn't care one bit, humming a tune as I twirled the wine jug in my hand. Let them scheme, let Xiao Rui fume with anger. The truth was simple. I didn't need the throne to win. I already had everything I wanted: freedom, good wine, long naps, and the sight of Xiao Rui's furious, helpless face. It was priceless. ## Chapter 8. The late-night summons. Wine always tastes better at night. The starry sky makes everything seem less serious. I was in the middle of a great drinking session, halfway through my third jug of wine, when a group of palace guards suddenly appeared outside my tent. General Chunyu, His Royal Highness the Crown Prince requests your presence at the palace, immediately, the guard said, his voice stiff and formal. Requests? I swirled the wine in my cup, a smirk playing on my lips. That's a fancy word for a command wrapped in silk. The guard's jaw tightened. I sighed heavily, handing the wine jug to Han Bo. Tell His Highness that if I have an accident on the way, it's because he interrupted my evening drink. Han Bo opened his mouth to argue, but I was already walking out of the tent, humming a tune. The palace at night had a strange beauty, free of the daytime bustle, the long corridors bathed in the warm glow of lanterns, shadows stretching across the floor like clawed hands. The guards led me straight to Xiao Rui's bedroom. The moment the door closed behind me, I knew tonight wasn't going to be simple. The room was dimly lit, charcoal burning in the corner, the scent of incense sweet and cloying. Xiao Rui was reclining on a soft couch, dressed in a black silk robe, exuding a dangerous, seductive charm, like a hunter lying in wait for his prey. I almost laughed out loud. Wow, he'd really gone all out to set the mood for me. It's an honor to have General Chunyu grace us with his presence, he said smoothly, his voice as sweet as honey. I collapsed onto a chair without being invited, not even bothering to bow. I didn't come here voluntarily. I had no choice. A smile tugged at the corner of Xiao Rui's lips. Would you prefer I visit your tent in person next time? Depends, I replied, reaching across the table to grab a cup of wine and draining it in one gulp. Will you bring wine with you? The wine was good, but I still preferred my own jug. A flicker of calculation and anger crossed Xiao Rui's eyes. He leaned forward slightly, his gaze soft and tender, his fingers brushing the rim of his wine cup. Chunyu, you've changed. I'm tired of hearing that, I said, pouring myself another cup of wine. It makes it sound like I was a pushover in my old life. You used to be loyal to me, obedient to my every word, he said softly, his voice laced with temptation. You were mine. Sounds boring, I replied flatly. Xiao Rui ignored the hint of rejection in my words. Rising from the couch and walking slowly toward me, the rustle of his silk robe loud in the quiet room. He sat down beside me, our knees nearly touching, his hand brushing my sleeve, his fingers lingering on my arm. Do you remember? The way you used to look at me, like you. I cut him off with a lazy grin. Like a starving wolf eyeing a juicy piece of meat? Yes, he nodded, about to continue. Because you always stole the best snacks from the imperial kitchen, I added, deadpan serious. Xiao Rui laughed lowly, about to speak again. Chunyu, I can give you everything: power, wealth, endless glory, and favor. All you have to do is... His fingers slid up my arm. I didn't even look at him, brushing his hand away like it was a fly buzzing around my head. Xiao Rui froze completely. "You don't love me at all," I said calmly, my words cutting through the thick, awkward tension in the room like a knife. Xiao Rui's eyes widened in shock, his face turning bright red with anger. "That's a lie! You don't want love. You want control," I said, swirling the wine in my cup. "A loyal dog that obeys your every command, a bed partner that comes running when you call. This isn't love, Xiao Rui, it's possession." Xiao Rui gritted his teeth, reaching out again to grab my hand. I leaned back to avoid his touch, raising my cup to take another sip of wine. "I'm not interested in playing your games. Can I just have a quiet drink in peace?" My voice was soft, but there was an unshakable firmness in it. This was the first time I'd ever seen Xiao Rui left completely speechless. He stood there frozen, his face a mixture of anger and confusion, like a chess player whose board had been flipped over. He stared at me intently, trying to find a flaw, a weakness, a desire he could exploit. But I just raised an eyebrow at him, grinning as I poured myself another cup of wine. The silence in the room was thick and awkward. I stood up, dusting off my robes. "Thanks for the good wine, Your Highness. Next time, just send the jug to my tent, it'll save us both the trouble." Xiao Rui's hand twitched slightly, but he didn't try to stop me, his eyes dark and stormy, like the sky before a thunderstorm. I walked out of the bedroom without looking back, humming a tune as I left the palace. The night breeze outside was cool and free, brushing against my face like a gentle caress. I raised my cup, draining the last drop of wine in it. Xiao Rui thought he could control me? How amusing. Little did he know, he was the one who was trapped. Hashtag chapter 10, saves the day by accident. Is there anything more torturous than pretending to write reports? Yes. Pretending to slack off while someone stares daggers at you from behind. I just spread a stack of border reports haphazardly across the table, planning to lay my head down on them and take a quick nap, when that familiar prickling sensation crawled up my neck again. It wasn't my imagination. Someone was staring at me so intensely, it felt like they were trying to bore a hole through my skull. I clicked my tongue in annoyance, opening one eye lazily. Sure enough, Crown Prince Xiao Rui was standing not far away, dressed in his formal crown prince robes that emphasized his broad shoulders and narrow waist, but putting on an act like he was just passing by, his eyebrows furrowed tightly. This was the third time he'd passed by the military strategy hall this week. "Lost your way, Your Highness?" I asked, letting out a long, drawn-out yawn, and pointing casually to the east. "The Imperial Kitchen is that way. This is the military strategy hall. No snacks served here." Xiao Rui's jaw tightened, his face set in a rigid smile that looked as fake as a mask. "General Chunyu, this prince is merely concerned about the border defense and came to take a look." "Aha," I said, drawing out the sound, resting my elbow on the table and propping my chin up with my hand, a mischievous glint in my eyes. "So concerned about border defense means sneaking up behind people and waiting for them to fall asleep on their reports?" "I wasn't sneaking." His voice rose sharply, a note of panic in his tone, and the tips of his ears turned bright red. I curled my lips into a smirk, thinking to myself, "Gotcha." And this was just the beginning. In the military camp, when I sat around playing dice with the soldiers, he'd suddenly appear out of nowhere, standing with his hands behind his back and watching like a hawk. On the training ground, the second I tried to sneak off to the shade for a nap, he'd show up right on cue, his face like thunder as he announced he was here to inspect the drills. Even during lunch, he'd block the kitchen door, staring at me intently, and swipe the entire plate of meat buns I'd been eyeing. If it weren't for his Crown Prince halo, I'd have suspected he was a professional stalker from some mountain bandit den. The afternoon sun was perfect. I was just explaining the secrets of dice to a young soldier. "This game isn't about luck, it's about probability. You see, if you spin your wrist with the right amount of force, you can control the outcome of the roll." Before I could finish my sentence, a shadow fell over us suddenly. The soldier caught sight of the person behind me out of the corner of his eye, his face turning as white as a sheet. He stammered out a bow, dropped the dice, and ran away as fast as his legs could carry him. All that was left were me, the dice rolling across the ground, and an uninvited audience. "You scared him away," I said, picking up the dice slowly, twirling one between my fingers, and speaking casually. Your Highness should smile more. Always looking like you're about to eat someone will only scare your subordinates. Xiao Rui ignored my teasing, sitting down directly across from me, his back straight as a board, like he was about to discuss matters of national importance. What were you talking about just now? Probability theory, I replied concisely, picking up a die and demonstrating. For example, this die has an equal probability of landing on any of its 6 sides. But if you find the right amount of force and angle, your chances of winning go way up. I handed him the die. Want to try? At first, he was clumsy and awkward, losing 3 rounds in a row, his face turning bright red with frustration, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. But later, he slowly got the hang of it, managing to win 2 rounds. The look of triumph on his face in that moment was exactly like a young boy who'd just won his first big battle, ridiculously funny. See? I said, leaning back in my chair, my tone casual. Not everything has to be solved with power and threats. Sometimes, figuring out the rules of the game is more effective than anything else. Xiao Rui's gaze lingered on my face for a long time, longer than was normal. I pretended not to notice, secretly grinning to myself. Hook, line, and sinker, Crown Prince. The people in the court weren't blind. The rumors about me doubled in no time. Why is the Crown Prince always hanging around General Chunyu? Have they made up again? That's dangerous. I tuned them out, but Xiao Rui's behavior only got worse. Banquets, hunting trips, every excuse under the sun to meet me alone. The most outrageous incident was one night when he barged into my tent without so much as a warning. Han Bo nearly had a heart attack, scrambling to offer him tea. I was sitting cross-legged on a mat, munching happily on a bag of beef jerky, grease smudged around my mouth. What brings your highness here? I asked, my words muffled by the food in my mouth. Pointing to the mat beneath me. The golden Nanmu chairs in the palace are way more comfortable than this ragged mat, aren't they? Xiao Rui stared at me for a long time, his eyes filled with a jumble of emotions. After a while, he spoke softly, his voice laced with a seriousness he didn't even seem aware of. I just wanted to see what you were doing. Eating, I replied, holding up the bag of beef jerky, feigning innocence. His lips pressed into a thin line, his face darkening with anger. You're impossible. I grinned widely, teasing him on purpose. You've said that 100 times. Be careful, Your Highness, if you keep clinging to me like this, people will start to think you're in love with me. Xiao Rui's eyes blazed with fury, but he didn't turn around and leave. That was the key. No matter how much I teased him, how much I brushed him off, he hovered around me like a circling eagle, afraid to pounce, but unwilling to fly away, staring at me like I was a rabbit caught in a trap. Occasionally, I could catch a glimpse of genuine emotion in his eyes. Curiosity, frustration, maybe even a hint of something he himself didn't understand, a hint of fascination. He hated losing control, hated not being able to read my mind, but he couldn't help coming back for more, desperate to figure me out. After he finally left, I lay back down on the mat, staring up at the tent ceiling, and laughed out loud. The Crown Prince wanted to get a handle on me? Let him keep guessing. The more he tried to figure me out, the deeper he'd sink, unable to climb out. I'd said it before. Palace banquets are nothing but elaborate traps. Not that there were necessarily assassins lurking in the shadows, though there probably were, but because the entire room was filled with nobles putting on airs, sucking up to each other more eagerly than they ate the food, and the dishes on the table were so scarce it was torture. I'd fought my way through the crowd to get to the roast duck platter, already forced to drink 3 cups of watery wine, my mood so foul I could have spit fire. The maids giggled behind their fans, their eyes darting in my direction every now and then. The ministers huddled together, whispering like gamblers swapping tips. Xiao Rui sat at the head of the table, dressed in his finest robes, looking like a perfectly carved jade statue, handsome but cold, untouchable. Only his gaze, like a hook, kept drifting toward me involuntarily. I picked up my wine cup, raising it lazily in his direction, then turned around and grabbed a dumpling, stuffing it into my mouth. Want to see me make a fool of myself? Fine. I'll put on a show for you. The worst thing about palace banquets is that everyone's too busy pretending to be elegant and scheming to notice the shadows lurking in the corners. But I noticed. I just had faster reflexes, that's all. Don't get me wrong. The reason I noticed something was off was because I dropped my chopsticks while picking up a meatball. As I bent down to retrieve them, I caught a movement out of the corner of my eye behind a pillar, a tall, black-clad figure, clearly here to kill someone. I knew it. I sighed quietly. Can't even get a peaceful meal. The words had barely left my mouth when the figure lunged forward suddenly. A flash of cold light, a sharp blade aimed straight at Xiao Rui's throat. Screams erupted in the hall instantly. The ministers panicked, shoving and trampling each other in their haste to escape. The guards scrambled around in disarray. As for Xiao Rui himself, he froze completely, his eyes wide with shock, the tip of the blade just inches away from his neck. Me? I still had a chopstick in my hand, my head spinning, half awake and half drunk. So I did the most logical thing I could think of. I flicked my wrist. The chopstick sliced through the air with a sharp whoosh, like a speeding dart, hitting the assassin's wrist dead center with a satisfying thud. The assassin grunted in pain, but didn't back down. He spun around, reaching for the dagger hidden at his waist. This time, I sighed in resignation, grabbing another chopstick and flicking it just as casually. The chopstick hit him right between the eyebrows. The force wasn't strong enough to kill him, but it was enough to make his head snap back, stumbling into the arms of two guards who'd finally woken up and remembered their duty. The guards immediately tackled him to the ground, cheering loudly as they dragged him away. The tension in the hall evaporated instantly, replaced by relieved chatter. Several maids fainted dramatically, and the ministers whispered among themselves, staring at me like I'd just performed some kind of divine miracle. Meanwhile, I finally picked up that meatball I'd been eyeing. Xiao Rui's gaze was fixed on me the entire time. He didn't look at the assassin, didn't glance at the chaos around him, his eyes were only on me. I leaned back in my chair, chewing the meatball slowly, and raised an eyebrow at him. What? It can't be. Are you jealous of a chopstick? He stood up, walking toward me slowly, his movements stiff and awkward, like he was fighting against some emotion deep inside him. You were half drunk. You weren't even paying attention. His voice trembled slightly, barely audible. Yep, that's right, I replied, licking the sauce off my thumb, my tone casual. Lucky for you, drunks always have amazing aim. He shook his head, like he wanted to laugh but couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he sat down directly beside me, so close #polished English version the proximity between us was thoroughly improper for imperial banquet etiquette. When he reached for his wine cup, his fingertips trembled faintly, not from the assassination attempt moments ago, but because of me. I caught that tremor, a teasing smile tugging at my lips as I sprawled lazily across the table. Relax, Your Highness. From now on, anyone who wants to take your life will have to get through me first. I paused, then added dryly, as for me, I'm far too lazy to let anyone ruin my peace and quiet. His eyes flickered, a maelstrom of conflicting emotions churning within, annoyance, relief, and perhaps a flicker of fascination he himself didn't recognize. Why? He pressed softly, stubbornness lacing his tone. Why are you protecting me? I feigned deep thought, tapping my chin with a chopstick. Well, if you die, I'd have to attend your funeral, wouldn't I? Those things are dreadfully tedious, terrible wine, worse food. The mere thought makes my skin crawl. I'd rather skip it entirely. He stared at me, dumbfounded, then suddenly burst out laughing. It was a short, startled sound, nothing like the practiced, artificial smiles he wore in court. That laugh sent a collective gasp rippling through the hall. The guests looked on as if they'd witnessed a once-in-a-century solar eclipse. The Crown Prince, laughing with me? It was nothing short of preposterous. I grinned triumphantly. That's more like it. Who knew you could actually smile like a normal person? His face darkened instantly, as if snapping back to his senses. He glowered at me irritably. You are utterly insufferable. Flattery, I said unapologetically, tipping an imaginary hat. I may not excel at much, but I've most certainly mastered this particular skill. By the banquet's end, the assassins had long since been dragged away for punishment. The nobles and princes buzzed with chatter about the thrilling attack, but Xiao Rui's gaze never left me, not once. Gone was the usual scrutiny and wariness, the calculated control. In their place was something else, something indescribable, something dangerous. I drained my last cup of wine, leaning back in my chair, and thought to myself, he's losing his composure. It was never the assassination that rattled him. It was me. I almost laughed out loud. Poor Crown Prince. Little did he know, he was already sinking step by step into a web called obsession. The more he struggled, the tighter it bound him. Chapter 11. Xiao Rui's turmoil. I've come to realize that dreams are inherently chaotic. You think you're in control of your own mind, but the next second, you might find yourself in a pink ballet skirt, clutching a rubber chicken, solemnly inspecting an army of thousands. At least, that's what all my dreams used to be like. Xiao Rui's dreams, however, were far more eventful. I found that out first thing the next morning. As usual, he arrived at the military camp in his crisp crown prince's robes, stern, regal, and unapproachable. Yet his ears bore a faint, telltale flush, and his eyes darted away whenever they met mine, refusing to hold my gaze. Witnessing this, my inner gossip monger perked up instantly. "Your Highness, did you sleep well last night?" I sprawled lazily in my chair, looking for all the world like the camp's master, and grinned at him. "Any pleasant dreams?" His jaw tightened. "Dreams are trivial matters, hardly worth mentioning," he said coldly. Translated into noble speak, that meant, yes, I dreamed, and it was extremely vexing. As for what exactly he dreamed about, I wouldn't find out until later. Xiao Rui had dreamed of the old Chunyu, the one who bowed at his feet, whispered oaths of loyalty, and trembled at his slightest touch. In the dream, that Chunyu had called his name over and over again, and that was how Xiao Rui woke up, seething with rage. He was angry that I was no longer the obedient lackey I used to be. Angry that he still found himself longing for the past. Most of all, angry that his rationality had been thrown into disarray by such an absurd dream, which was precisely why watching him squirm awkwardly all day long put me in an excellent mood. Predictably, he began looking for ways to provoke me. It was his go-to move whenever he felt flustered and unsettled. "The general seems rather fatigued today," he said, sauntering over to me, his voice dripping with honeyed sweetness. "Did you toss and turn all night? Or were you thinking of this prince?" I stared at him blankly, then yawned so wide my jaw nearly dislocated. "Sorry, what did you say?" "Nothing," I muttered, rubbing my messy hair. Anything that requires brainpower is far too tiring to listen to. A barely noticeable twitch tugged at the corner of his mouth. Clearly, my nonchalance was driving him up the wall. "I live by a simple motto," I repeated, raising an eyebrow triumphantly. "If something takes effort, don't do it. You should try it sometime, Your Highness. It might even keep those wrinkles at bay." His brows furrowed immediately. Of course, his well-preserved face was smooth as ever, free of any wrinkles. But I simply loved seeing him so flustered. It was my surefire win in our little game of wits. The truth was, Xiao Rui was utterly unaccustomed to being ignored. Everyone else threw themselves at him eagerly, like moths to a flame, rushing headlong into the traps he set. But me? When I saw the fire, I just shrugged, turned around, and found a comfortable spot to take a nap. And that, more than anything else, was slowly driving him to the brink of madness. That night, he showed up at my tent unannounced. No guards in tow, no elaborate excuses, just him, standing alone beneath the flickering candlelight, looking like a tragic hero straight out of a romance novel. "You treat everything like a game," he said, his voice low and laced with a hint of weariness I could barely detect. "As if nothing in this world matters enough to catch your eye." I was lying lazily on my camp bed, my feet dangling over the edge, a wine jug in hand, sipping slowly. At his words, I held up the jug in a mock toast. "You're absolutely right. Care for a drink?" He ignored my offer, stepping closer to me. The candlelight cast shadows over his face, but I could still see his hands trembling slightly at his sides before he clenched them into tight fists. "You used to." His voice trailed off, thick with an almost imperceptible catch, then rose sharply. "You used to belong to me." I blinked, tilting my head to look at him. "Chunyu, stop mocking me," he snapped, his eyes blazing with anger. "How interesting," I murmured, swirling the remaining wine in the jug. "I thought you were rather enjoying yourself these past few days." He froze abruptly, every muscle in his body tensing, like a predator finally realizing its prey was far from defenseless. I supposed I should admit it, I thoroughly enjoyed teasing him like this. Because every time I brushed off his advances with effortless ease, another crack appeared in the composed, calculating mask of the Crown Prince, revealing more of the flustered, genuine man beneath, the real Xiao Rui. After he stormed out of the tent in a huff that night, I laughed until my sides hurt. But once my laughter died down, I found myself thinking about the fleeting emotions I'd glimpsed in his eyes. Confusion, longing, anger, all tangled together in a messy, chaotic knot. He didn't even know what he wanted anymore. He hated the past, hated feeling out of control, and yet, he couldn't stop looking at me. The more I pushed him away, the deeper he fell. I stretched lazily, lying back on the bed and staring up at the tense ceiling, chuckling softly to myself. Poor Crown Prince, I whispered. You've never had to chase anyone before, have you? With that, I yawned, rolled over, and fell into a deep, untroubled sleep. After all, unlike him, I had no time to waste obsessing over trivial matters that were neither edible nor drinkable. Hashtag Chapter 12. The unmasked weakness. Life at court was nothing short of a grand theatrical performance. Everyone wore an elaborate mask, reciting lines they'd rehearsed countless times. They bowed and scraped, never daring to look up when they should kneel, terrified of messing up their roles. Me, though, I'd always been too lazy to attend the rehearsals. That morning, I was late again. When I walked into the main hall, the faint scent of wine still clung to me, and I was even holding half a leftover steamed bun in my hand. The ministers clutched their memorials as if they were lifelines, their eyes fixed on me in unison, glances so sharp. You'd think my few minutes of tardiness were enough to bring the entire dynasty crashing down. Emperor Xiao Jin sat upright on the dragon throne, his face pale but his eyes still sharp as ever. Beside him stood Xiao Rui, dressed in his crown prince's robes, his posture straight and his expression cold, his jaw set in a firm line. He didn't even spare me a glance, which was precisely how I knew his attention was fixed squarely on me. I gave him a lazy two-fingered salute, then sauntered over to my seat and plopped down unceremoniously. Let the show begin. Censor Fong was the first to step forward, his voice ringing with righteous indignation. Your Majesty, the border war grows increasingly urgent, and the military situation is critical, yet General Chunyu arrives late, reeking of wine. Is this the loyalty of the blade you rely on to safeguard the realm? I took a huge bite of my steamed bun, speaking around the mouthful. No matter how sharp a sword is, it needs regular polishing and maintenance, doesn't it? In my humble opinion, wine is the finest maintenance there is. At those words, the ministers in the hall gasped in unison, like a bunch of cats whose tails had been stepped on. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I caught sight of Xiao Rui's fingers twitching almost imperceptibly at his side. A tiny, minuscule movement, but one that didn't escape my notice. He was holding something back. How intriguing. Next, several more ministers took turns stepping forward, each one denouncing me for neglecting my duties and being unworthy of my position. Clearly, they were trying to weave a net to trap me completely. Their words were too polished, their coordination too seamless. It was obvious this had been planned well in advance. Sure enough, right then, a group of armored guards burst into the hall. They weren't the Imperial Guards stationed by the Emperor's side. The insignia on their armor was one I'd never seen before. I leaned back in my chair, a cold smile tugging at my lips. Here we go. This was a coup in the making. The guards knelt down on one knee in unison, but not before the Emperor on the dragon throne. Instead, they knelt before Censor Fong, who'd just stepped forward to impeach me. An uproar erupted in the hall. Your Majesty, Censor Fong said, bowing slightly, his tone oozing with arrogance. You are growing old, your energy fading. Coupled with a drunken, incompetent brute like General Chunyu here, this magnificent empire will soon be doomed. We implore you, abdicate the throne and pass it on to His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Xiao Rui froze instantly. He whipped his head around to stare at Censor Fong, then turned to glance at the Emperor on the throne, his eyes wide with shock. This coup, this had never been his idea. Someone had dared to alter his script. I licked the crumbs off my fingers slowly, then stood up and stretched lazily, as if waking from a deep sleep. TSK tisk, I said. Staging a coup this early in the day, you certainly have guts. Censor Fong let out a cold laugh, sweeping me with a disdainful gaze. General Chunyu, your time is up. You wallow in wine and debauchery, having long since corrupted the military's morale. Step aside willingly, or I won't hesitate to show you no mercy. I feigned hesitation. Step aside, stand up, step down. So many orders. I'm afraid I can't remember them all at once. I tilted my head to look at the guards, who'd already drawn their swords. Slowly, I pulled a single chopstick out of my sleeve. Don't ask why I carry chopsticks with me everywhere. Some habits just stick. I twirled the chopstick between my fingers skillfully. Tell you what, I said casually. If any of you can tell me who stole the quartermaster's seal last night, I might consider giving you all a break and stepping aside. At those words, everyone in the hall paled visibly. I wasn't exaggerating. Last night, when they'd gathered to plot their rebellion, I'd noticed that the seals on the military supply documents looked nothing like the official ones, not to mention the wax used to seal them was the wrong color entirely. Full of flaws. Amateurish work. Really. The ministers' faces turned as white as a sheet. One of the guards even stammered in fear, How? How did you know? I had no patience for his stuttering. With a flick of my wrist, I sent the chopstick flying. This time, the chopstick didn't hurt anyone. Instead, it struck one of the candle holders in the hall with pinpoint accuracy. Sparks flew, landing on a scroll hanging nearby. Flames erupted instantly, thick smoke billowing toward the ceiling beams. Oops, I said, clapping my hands in mock surprise. Slipped my hand. My apologies. Panic spread like wildfire. The carefully orchestrated coup collapsed in disarray. The guards dropped their swords, scrambling to put out the fire in a frantic rush. Finally, the Emperor's Imperial Guards arrived amid the chaos, surrounding the rebels and arresting them on the spot. Censor Fong was dragged away, screaming hysterically all the while. I sat back down in my chair, picking up an abandoned wine cup from the table beside me and pouring myself a drink. Crisis averted, I said, raising the cup in a toast to the chaos strewn across the hall. Later, after the hall had been cleaned up and the Emperor had dismissed the court, Xiao Rui cornered me at the palace gate. Cornered me, pressing me firmly against the wall. His face was mere inches from mine, his hot breath fanning my cheeks. Why? He whispered, his voice hoarse, thick with suppressed pain. If you truly want nothing from me, then why do you keep protecting me, over and over again? I took a small sip of wine, answering him casually. Because teasing you is fun. He stared at me intently, his gaze burning, never wavering for a second. And besides, I added, my smile widening, watching you get angry is just too entertaining. His jaw tightened even more, but beneath the surface of his eyes, something was stirring, something hot, something confused, something vulnerable, something he'd never shown anyone else before. I leaned closer to him, closing the distance between us. Close enough for him to smell the faint scent of wine on my clothes. Close enough to make his breath catch in his throat. Relax, Your Highness, I whispered. With me around, life is never boring. I'd hate to see you die so soon. With that, I raised my hand and patted him on the shoulder, like a buddy would, and then slipped out from under his arm, walking away without looking back. Behind me, I could feel his gaze burning into my back, hot, intense, unwavering. No more hatred, no more suspicion, only something else, something he couldn't even begin to understand himself. I smiled to myself, a triumphant grin spreading across my face. This feeling was far more intoxicating than any fine wine. Hashtag chapter 13, the Crown Prince's relentless pursuit if life were a game. Then I'd say Xiao Rui had finally switched up his tactics. Once, he'd approached our little standoff like a master chess player, every move calculated, every trap meticulously laid, determined to turn me into a pawn he could control at will. But now, he'd switched to the courtship strategy. Unfortunately for him, he was terrible at it. It all started with gifts. One morning, when I woke up, I found an exquisite lacquered wooden box sitting outside my tent door. I'd half expected it to contain either a declaration of war or the severed head of a pig or something equally dramatic. But when I opened it, I found a luxurious robe embroidered with golden thread, its fabric so fine, it was worth more than all the clothes I'd ever owned put together. I prodded the robe with a chopstick, making a face of distaste. The material was far too slippery. It would be utterly uncomfortable to wear. The next day, another box arrived. This time, it contained a jar of aged, prized wine. My eyes lit up. Finally, a gift worth having. But when I poured myself a glass and took a sip, I almost gagged. It tasted like watered-down flower nectar, pretty to look at, but completely lacking in bite. Your Highness, I muttered to the empty space outside my tent, rolling my eyes. If you're trying to win me over, at least have the decency to consider my alcohol tolerance. On the third day, the gift was a jade pendant. Its jade was warm and lustrous, its carving exquisitely detailed, a lifelike dragon coiled around it. It was clearly priceless. I held the pendant up to the sunlight, admiring it for a moment, then turned around and hung it on the chicken coop in the camp, using it as a decoration. The soldiers roared with laughter when they saw it. I, however, thought it was a perfectly good use for it. That night, I could almost hear Xiao Rui grinding his teeth in frustration, even from halfway across the capital city. When the nice gifts failed, he switched to the chance encounter tactic. I went to the market to buy roasted chestnuts, and when I turned around, there he was, coincidentally inspecting the shops along the street. I went fishing by the river, my hat pulled low over my eyes, half asleep, and there he was again, coincidentally making a tour of the water conservancy projects in the area. I even ran into him at the training grounds once. He put on a serious show of inspecting the soldiers, but his eyes never left me for a second, even though I was fast asleep under a tree at the time. I half wanted to stick a note on my forehead that said, "I'm over here. Give me a break, Your Highness. I see right through your little schemes." But by far the most amusing incident was his late-night visit. I'd just climbed into bed, a jar of real, strong liquor by my side, when I heard footsteps outside my tent. They were heavy and deliberate, not the silent, stealthy steps of an assassin. Assassins moved like shadows. Only someone from the royal family would be so bold as to make such a racket. I didn't even bother sitting up, calling out lazily instead, "Your Highness, surely you're aware that tents don't have locks?" The tent flap was pulled open from the outside. Xiao Rui stepped in. He was wearing a well-made set of casual clothes, his hair loose and flowing over his shoulders. He looked nothing like someone who just happened to be out on a late-night inspection. He was clearly dressed up. He stood there, looking incredibly awkward, like a young man trying desperately to act calm, while panicking on the inside. "General," he said, forcing a calm tone, his ears turning pink again, "I merely happened to be passing by." I raised an eyebrow at him. Passing by the military camp, in the middle of the night? I propped myself up on one elbow, chuckling softly. "Oh, I see. So His Royal Highness the Crown Prince is trying to keep me company now?" His jaw tightened instantly, his voice sharpening with irritation. "This is not a game." "Everything in this world is a game to me," I said, reaching over slowly to pick up the wine jug. "Though I must say, Your Highness, you're not very good at playing it." That remark clearly struck a nerve. His face flushed, turning a patchwork of red and green. And yet, despite his anger, he couldn't help taking a few more steps toward me. His eyes dark and intense, his voice dropping to a low murmur, like a lover whispering sweet nothings. "You know exactly how I feel about you, yet you keep mocking me at every turn. And still, you accept my protection, take my gifts, consume my time without a second thought. What do you really want from me?" I took a sip of wine, answering him lightly. "Want from you? Why, nothing more than a bit of entertainment, of course." His eyes flashed with sharpness. "Do you take me for a fool?" "Not at all," I said, setting the jug down and meeting his gaze head-on, my voice still casual and unconcerned. "I just think it's about time you learned what it feels like to want something you can't have, to chase after someone instead of always giving the orders." At those words, he fell completely silent. The silver-tongued crown prince, master manipulator, expert at reading people, was left utterly speechless, with no retort to offer. He could only stand there, frozen in place, his eyes swirling with a maelstrom of emotions. No more anger, only a burning, unspoken longing. I stretched lazily, putting on my most relaxed and unbothered expression. "I say, Your Highness," I said, yawning, "if you're going to sneak into my tent in the middle of the night from now on, at least bring some decent, strong wine with you." His lips parted, as if he wanted to say something more, but in the end, he just let out a cold huff, spun on his heel, and strode out of the tent without even bothering to close the flap behind him. The next morning, the entire military camp was abuzz with gossip. Everyone was talking about how the Crown Prince had paid a late-night visit to the general's tent. Some claimed they'd heard voices arguing inside. Others swore they'd seen the Crown Prince leaving with a bright red face and a furious expression. I couldn't be bothered to explain anything. Let them speculate all they wanted. The truth was simple enough. Xiao Rui was falling deeper and deeper into the web of obsession, and there was no turning back now. And I was sitting at the end of that path, drinking my wine, waiting to watch him trip and fall flat on his face. Because the harder he tried to chase me, the more out of control he became. And the only thing that could unravel the carefully constructed world of the lofty Crown Prince was me. A lazy, sharp-tongued troublemaker who loved nothing more than to get under his skin. Hashtag chapter 14. The final reversal of roles. If there was one thing I knew about Xiao Rui, it was this: he hated losing more than anything else. Whether it was the political intrigues of the court, a game of chess, or this silent battle of wills between us, if he didn't come out on top, he'd keep coming back over and over again, determined to turn the tables. Which was why, when he burst into my tent in a rage on a stormy night, I knew the show was about to get interesting. His robes were disheveled, his hair soaked with rain and plastered to his forehead. His eyes blazed with fury, his entire body radiating a barely contained, manic energy. He didn't waste any time with pleasantries. He stepped forward in a single stride, grabbing me by the shoulders and slamming me roughly against the table behind me. Cups and bowls clattered to the floor, shattering into pieces. His chest heaved violently, his hot breath washing over my face. "You've mocked me long enough," he growled, his voice hoarse and trembling with suppressed emotion. "From this moment on, you are mine." I blinked, then grinned up at him. "Yours? Sounds like a lot of trouble. Do you have any proof? A contract of servitude, perhaps?" "Chunyu," he roared, tightening his grip on my collar and yanking me closer, his face inches from mine. "Stop playing games. This time, it's not a game." His body was rigid, trembling all over, with anger, with frustration, and with something else he couldn't even name. I said nothing, letting him believe he was in control. His chest rose and fell rapidly, his lips just a breath away from mine. I could feel the tremor in his breathing. Then, I leaned down, silencing the words he hadn't yet had a chance to speak with a kiss. It was a kiss devoid of any tenderness, any hesitation, a kiss of pure, unyielding possession. For a split second, he froze completely. Then, a muffled whimper escaped his lips. Half resistance, half surrender. His fingers curled into my sleeves, his grip surprisingly strong, but the initial push of rejection soon turned into an unconscious clinging. "Tisk," I murmured, pulling back slightly, my lips brushing against his, a teasing smile playing on my face. "That reaction doesn't exactly sound like reluctance, Your Highness." His face flushed bright red, but he didn't argue, only managing to grit out a few words through clenched teeth. You're a menace." I laughed softly, kissing him again, deeper this time. When it came to physical strength, he was by no means weak, but he was no match for me. Besides, I never fought against my desires. He, however, had been suppressing his for far too long. His hands had started out pressed firmly against my chest, stiff and unyielding, but slowly, so slowly, they began to relax, his fingers tracing the lines of my back as if against his will. In that moment, the Crown Prince, who'd always held all the power, who'd always been in control, lost all his dominance completely. And he knew it. When I finally pulled away from him, he was gasping for breath, his eyes glistening with moisture, his pupils dilated, his hair messy and tangled against his cheeks. If any of the court ministers had seen him like this, their jaws would have dropped to the floor. I raised my thumb, brushing it gently over his flushed cheek, slowly, deliberately. "Now, Your Highness," I whispered, my voice laced with mischief. "Tell me, who belongs to whom?" He glared up at me fiercely, but there was a flustered panic in his eyes, his lips trembling slightly. You're a disaster." "Indeed I am," I said, leaning down to whisper in his ear, my lips brushing against his skin. "But you just can't seem to get enough of me, can you?" His body shuddered violently beneath mine. The rain outside poured harder, the sound of it lashing against the tent drowning out the world beyond. Inside the tent, the air between us was thick with heat, so intense it could have melted the storm away. Xiao Rui stopped struggling at last, going limp in my arms, all his defenses crumbling away completely. The once arrogant hunter had become a docile prey. His voice was hoarse, as if sandpapered, as he whispered my name over and over again. "Chunyu." I lowered my head, kissing him once more, this time, softer, gentler, with a hint of indulgence I rarely showed. When I pulled away, I pressed my lips to his ear, whispering softly, "Relax, Your Highness. From now on, you don't have to try so hard anymore. Having me here is enough." This time, he didn't argue, didn't struggle. The reversal of roles was sealed, as clear and distinct as the faint taste of wine still lingering on my tongue. To the rest of the world, I, Chunyu, remained the fearsome, formidable general, the Crown Prince's most loyal blade and shield, cold, reliable, unbreakable. But only the two of us knew the truth beneath that polished facade. Only we knew who had truly let down their guard, who had fallen into the trap called willing surrender, and who had truly won this battle of wills. And I hadn't even broken a sweat. Hashtag chapter 15. The lazy general's unquestionable victory. If you asked any of the ministers at court, they'd tell you I was still the same old Chunyu, the sharpest sword in the empire, the Crown Prince's most loyal protector. Cold, dependable, unshakable. I couldn't be bothered to correct their misconception. After all, what fun would it be to shatter this little illusion of harmony? The truth, however, was far more entertaining. I was living a life of leisure, drinking my wine, and watching Xiao Rui twist himself into knots trying to win my favor. Take this morning, for example. Court was in session, as usual, filled with the same tedious, repetitive nonsense. Talk of land taxes, grain transportation, and some nobleman wailing about how his neighbor's dog had stolen his prized pet pigeons. I sat off to the side, resting my chin in my hand, pretending to listen attentively while secretly pulling a handful of plum candies out of my sleeve and popping them into my mouth, savoring the sweet-sour flavor. Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Xiao Rui's every move. He'd glanced at me more than once, more than twice, dozens of times, in fact, like a lovesick schoolboy eager to catch a glimpse of his crush and see if she'd noticed his new outfit. Every time our eyes met by chance, he'd look away quickly, his brows furrowing, as if he'd been caught doing something shameful, as if he wasn't the one who'd been staring. The mighty Crown Prince, undone by the flutter of his own heart. The ministers were murmuring among themselves, their voices filled with admiration. Look at General Chunyu, so devoted to His Royal Highness, always keeping him in her sight, never straying far. Meanwhile, I was thinking, maybe another plum candy. No, wait, these are getting a bit too sour. After court was dismissed, Xiao Rui cornered me again, this time, in the covered walkway of the Imperial Garden. Chunyu, he said, his tone still carrying the authoritative edge of a crown prince, but his ears burning bright red. Tonight, you will accompany me to view the lanterns in the Imperial Garden. Oh, me? I licked the plum candy residue off my fingers, looking at him with a playful smile. His jaw tightened, his words coming out stiff and formal. Yes, this is an order. I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he could hear. An order? Or an invitation? He froze instantly, his lips parting, but no words came out. This speechless, flustered act was becoming something of a habit with him these days. That night, he was waiting for me in the Imperial Garden, the grounds illuminated by countless glowing lanterns. He was dressed in a moon-white robe made of the finest cloud-patterned silk, clearly carefully chosen. Nothing like the casual attire one would wear for a simple stroll. He poured me a cup of wine with his own hands. If any of the ministers had seen this, they'd have fainted on the spot. Drink, he said. I picked up the cup, swirling the wine inside and sniffing it. Not poisoned. How novel. Chunyu, he said, his brows furrowing, his voice tinged with helplessness but none of his usual anger. Must you treat everything as a joke? Of course, I said, taking a small sip. The wine was rich and full-bodied, finally. Something to my taste. After all, it's my greatest charm, isn't it? He sighed in defeat, looking thoroughly exasperated, but when I leaned lazily against the railing of the pavilion, his gaze softened involuntarily as it fell on me. The crown prince who once commanded me with cold authority now tiptoed around me like a lovesick youth, careful not to say or do anything that might displease me. The rumors swirling around the court were utterly ridiculous. Have you noticed? His Royal Highness has been looking much better lately. Surely it's because General Chunyu is by his side. Supporting him. Yes. Yes. What a loyal pair they are, the prince and his general. General Chunyu will surely serve his Royal Highness with unwavering devotion until her last breath. Until my last breath? Please. I could barely be bothered to get out of bed in the morning. Last breaths were the furthest thing from my mind. They would never know the truth. They would never know that it was Xiao Rui's gaze that followed me everywhere. That it was he who found excuse after excuse to be near me. That it was he who acted like a lovesick fool, pouring me wine with his own hands, terrified of making me frown. If anyone had truly been conquered in this little game of ours, it certainly wasn't me. That night, after several more cups of wine, Xiao Rui was thoroughly drunk. And in his drunkenness, he finally mumbled the words he'd never dare admit when sober. Chunyu, Don't leave me. I raised an eyebrow, teasing him deliberately. Why not leave? The wine here is excellent, after all. He frowned immediately afterward, his face clouding over with annoyance, as if he was angry with himself for letting the word slip. But the next second, he buried his face in the crook of my neck, his warm breath seeping through the thin fabric of my robe, burning my skin. I hate you, he mumbled, his voice muffled, tinged with a hint of childish grievance. I laughed, draining the last of the wine in my cup. What a coincidence, I said. I hate you too. His arms tightened around me, pulling me even closer. To the outside world, nothing had changed. I was still the fearsome general, the sharpest sword and strongest shield in the Crown Prince's hand. I bowed when I should bow, obeyed when I should obey, and would step in front of him without hesitation to block the blade of an assassin. The perfect picture of a loyal protector. But behind closed doors, it was Xiao Rui who carefully studied my every mood and whim. A single smile from me could make his heart race. A single touch could keep him awake all night. He followed me around like a shadow, never realizing he'd long since fallen into the trap called willing surrender. All I'd done was lean back, drink my wine, and refuse to play by his rules. And in doing so, I'd toppled the unshakable throne he'd built for himself. Now, he sat across the table from me, his gaze fixed on me, struggling to hide the burning longing in his eyes, a longing for my smile, my touch, my very presence. As for me, I poured myself another cup of wine, stretching lazily, a triumphant smile curving my lips. I murmured to myself, savoring the rich, mellow flavor of the wine on my tongue. How utterly delightful. I'd done nothing at all, and yet, I'd won everything.